Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'd like to welcome you to this webinar, Responding to Elder Abuse Victims with Alzheimer's Disease or Other Dementias, being brought to you by the Elder Justice Initiative and the Office for Victims of Crime Training and Technical Assistance Center. As with all technology, we may at some point experience a momentary lapse in the webinar session. In the event of a problem, please be patient, remain with us, and the webinar should resume shortly. We do want to stop and take a moment here to see that everyone is connected. If you do have a technical problem, please type a private chat message to the technical specialist, Kayla, in the feedback box on the lower right. That's our chat feature. If you cannot access the chat or something is not working, you can also email Kayla at khough@ovcttac.org. We'd love to note that today's session is being recorded. These sessions are made available to you on the OVC TTAC and the Elder Justice Initiative training websites. If you do have other questions that come in your head throughout the webinar, feel free to also type those in the chat box. We'll be taking time at the end of the webinar to address any questions that you might have for our presenters today. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to our host, Nina Shaw, a trial attorney with the Civil Division Fraud Section. Nina.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Again, my name is Nina Shaw. Thanks for joining our webinar on Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. Like she said, this is a part of a series of webinars hosted by the Elder Justice Initiative. The initiative is a mission that was created by the Department of Justice to combat elder abuse, financial fraud, and other scams that target older adults. And there are a number of ways that the Elder Justice Initiative works to support these goals, both through the community, law enforcement research, and providing training and resources like this webinar. You can actually go onto our website at elderjustice.gov and access the wealth of materials that are on the site. You can go to get outreach materials, relevant laws, and toolkits for putting together your multidisciplinary team. And there we go. So this is the website that you can go onto, and as you can see, there's a lot of tabs. There's a lot of great resources that are available. With that, we have today two presenters, Lieutenant Hank Levenson and Sergeant Tim Sutton. Hank started his law enforcement career in 1979 with the Gretna Police Department in Louisiana. He's been a law enforcement instructor for over 30 years and has been involved in teaching Alzheimer's awareness for public safety for over 7 years. And Tim Sutton is in his 29th year as a law enforcement officer in the Commonwealth of Virginia. He's worked with families dealing with Alzheimer's, autism, and other disabilities for the past 15 years. So thanks again to Hank and Tim for coming to speak with us today. And with that, I will let them take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. To get started, I just want to go over some of the objectives that we'll talk about today, and these are in no particular order. One of the things we're going to cover today is the proper response to calls involving patients or victims of Alzheimer's, and on the scene, how to deal with them and understanding Alzheimer's patients. Quite often, they're misdiagnosed, and we don't handle them as effectively and proactively as we can and should. And then also, one of the big things with handling patients with Alzheimer's is going to be working with and understanding the caregiver. And these caregivers quite often are going to be family members. You may come across situations where the caregiver is at an assisted living facility where the patient is living to get the care they need, but most often it'll be out in the public or scenes you respond to with loved ones of the caregiver. And it's important to understand what they're going through. And as always in law enforcement, one of the most important things is protecting everybody while we're on these calls, particularly the officers that are responding to these calls and working with everybody in the community. We want to make sure we all go home, but also we want to make sure that those we're dealing with are protected as well. And we'll get into some effective methods of search and rescue, and we'll talk a little bit about why search and rescue for missing persons with Alzheimer's can and will be a little different than what might be another search and rescue operation. And then towards the end of the webinar, we'll go over some additional resources that are available for you out in your communities. One of the most important things and key to it is just understanding what Alzheimer's is. In a lot of cases, and I can say this, when I was on the street many years ago, looking back, we handled some cases with people with Alzheimer's. We did not recognize it as Alzheimer's and misdiagnosed it. Quite often it's going to be looked at as somebody with some type of mental disorder, and you may approach it in that fashion. But one of the key things to remember is Alzheimer's is not a mental disorder. It's a disease of the brain, and we'll go through some of that. So it's important to make note of that as we're talking today. So when you do come across some of the signs and indicators that we'll be going through, that you can recognize that. This is a problem that is worldwide. These numbers that we're looking at right now, about 5.4 million people in the U.S. have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, about 24 million worldwide, and these are going to be a little, these numbers are going to be a little low because they change constantly, and these are the ones that are known or being diagnosed. It's unknown how many people are suffering Alzheimer's with one of the early stages that haven't been diagnosed, haven't been to a doctor yet. So, you know, that 5.4 million in the U.S. is going to be a lot larger if we were able to diagnose and track everybody that has it. But again, as you can see worldwide, it is a problem, and it's going to continue to get worse as we move on. Around the year 2050, which is not too far from now, life expectancy will reach about 90 plus. It's gone up, you know, every few years due to medical technology. People are taking better care of themselves, eating better. But when that happens, more people are gonna end up with Alzheimer's. Around 70 million will be over the age of 65. 10% of those will have Alzheimer's disease. And of the 20 million that will be over the age of 85, about 50% of those will have Alzheimer's. So if you think about in our communities, how many people are approaching that age or will be that age in a few years, it just kind of shows you a little bit more of why it's so important for us in law enforcement and public safety to understand more about it and know how to deal with these cases more effectively. So why the dramatic increase? Several reasons. One, baby boomers are getting older now. A lot of baby boomers are getting to the retirement age. Some have been there for a few years. We're seeing a lot more of our veterans coming back with PTSD, and that's been linked to early onset of Alzheimer's. Again, advanced medical testing, better education. People know more what to look for and how to look at the signs and symptoms. And also it's been diagnosed in younger people. Years ago, it used to be thought of as an old person's disease that, you know, grandma or grandpa would get Alzheimer's as they get in their 70s and 80s. But there have been people in their 30s and 40s that have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So, you know, that's another reason why the dramatic increase in the numbers that we'll be seeing. But who's affected by Alzheimer's? As you see this slide, just about everybody we know in some fashion will be. It could be family members, your parents, grandparents, friends, and also if you think about it, everybody in your agency is affected in some way, either by having a loved one or a family member or friend that has been affected by it, or or somebody in your agency has responded to a call that involves somebody with Alzheimer's. So when we're on scenes and you see it, you know, don't think, well, this isn't going to affect me, or why should I know about this because it doesn't affect me. It does. It affects everybody, and it can affect everybody in a drastic way. How does it affect law enforcement? Well, as we talk today, you'll see, I mean, several ways. Quite often in Alzheimer's, we come across missing or lost patients. We'll find patients. We'll see somebody just roaming down, wandering around down the street, or we'll get a call of somebody that was, that another citizen found and they appear to be disoriented. Calls for service, traffic stops, driving issues. There's several different things that we need to be aware of and that will impact law enforcement. The last one here, risk assessment, is as we're going through and see these people that we're dealing with and start talking to them and learning how to deal with them, we need to kind of do a risk assessment on them to understand just kind of what stage they're at, what kind of risk they are to themselves or to us or others. So again, it impacts law enforcement on a daily basis. And if you haven't been on a call, you probably have been. You just may not have been able to identify it. And after today, you may think back and say, oh, that call I went on with that gentleman, 2 months ago, now I'm seeing that probably was Alzheimer's, and maybe we could have handled that a little bit better.
Like Hank was saying, and he always says out there when we're teaching classes, you don't know what you don't know. If you haven't been trained on this, you may misinterpret some of the behaviors and think you're dealing with somebody with a mental health disorder when in fact Alzheimer's is an actual disease. One thing you'll hear a lot is people saying grandma, mom, dad, whoever has dementia. They will use the word dementia without any problem. And you'll understand as I go through this why many people are hesitant to use the word Alzheimer's. But what dementia is, it basically replaces the word senility. When grandma or grandpa used to be senile, the word used now is dementia, which means basically a loss of intellectual functioning such as thinking, remembering, or reasoning. We all have those moments during our life, but it's issues when those start to affect everyday life, everything we do daily, the simple tasks. It starts, you have problems completing those tasks. So the way I look at dementia and types of dementia is kind of like telling somebody you're sick. If you called in sick to work, okay, you're labeled sick. That would be the umbrella. Underneath of that, okay, have you got a cold? Have you got the flu? Have you got a sinus infection, earache? What's going on to make you sick? So sick is that umbrella. Well, in this case, what we're trying to teach is dementia is that umbrella. And there are probably 50 or 60 different types of dementia out there. Some of them are Alzheimer's. Strokes can lead to dementia. Cancer treatments can lead to dementia. Chronic alcoholics may end up suffering from dementia. Brain injuries. Hank was talking about the PTSD. Also the traumatic brain injuries, people coming back from war where the brain's been rocked and it's bruised and there's injury may cause the dementia. Parkinson's, and there are many other. The difference is with Alzheimer's is it is an actual disease where a plaque, beta amyloid plaque, starts to form in the brain, and it just starts to overrun the whole brain and starts to cut off the synapses where the information transfers back and forth through the brain. It chokes those synapses off, and they are destroyed, so those memories are no longer there. Alzheimer's disease is responsible for almost 50% of the dementias that are out there. What I'm going to do is we're going to go through a timeline, and we call this the life and loss of Lenny. And what I want to stress to you is Alzheimer's disease and many of your dementias typically affect short-term memory. And your short-term memory, part of that is actually being able to form new memories. If any of you all, are sitting there and were to think about where you parked your car, the route you took to come to work or go to the grocery store, you could probably mentally walk yourself backwards and end up at that starting point. It's called reverse reasoning. Many times this is jeopardized with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. But I want to stress that short-term memory is part of it is being able to develop the new memories. So we're going to give Lenny a life. If you look at the left of the screen, that's the born-on date, and all the way to the right, you're going to be transported through his life. But what I try to get through is when you are born out of the womb, your brain has to start learning new things. One of the first things your brain learns how to do is breathe. That whole process has changed. The eating has changed. Your brain has to learn how to swallow. So we're going to take Lenny, and as he starts to grow up very quickly, his brain's learning how to do a lot of different things, roll over, walking, eventually potty training. We end up getting to kindergarten, and the main focus of kindergarten is social skills, learning that it's not about me. It's about other people, sharing toys, get along with people. We take Lenny on up through elementary school, middle school, to high school. In high school, 16 years old, most states, you end up getting your driver's license. So you're learning how to multitask and doing different things. And as Lenny keeps going up, let's say he goes to college. He's in college, meets some girl, they start dating. Let's say he meets Jane. But follow along this timeline. And he meets Jane. They graduate from college. They're still dating. Lenny decides he wants to go into law enforcement. Let's say he goes into law enforcement, he becomes a police officer. A year down the road, he and Jane get married. As time progresses, they end up having children. Let's say they have a boy and a girl. They have a boy named Joe, a girl named Lori. Take him through his career, about halfway through his career. You know, the big joke with law enforcement and marriages many times end up in divorce. So we're going to throw a divorce in there just for illustrative purposes. 2 years go by, he ends up meeting another young lady, and he ends up dating her, getting married, and they end up having 2 children. They have a boy and a girl. They have Frank and they have Lisa. So we're going to take Lenny on through to the rest of his career, and let's say he retires. And as they get older, Frank and Lisa start talking, saying, you know, Mom and Dad have got a lot going on. They've got the grass to cut. They've got the house to keep up with. Frank says, you know, I've got...
Sorry to interrupt. Do you mind speaking up a little bit? I think the listeners are having a little bit of difficulty hearing you.
Yeah, I've got the mic right to my mouth. I'm not sure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Have you got me now? How about now?
I think you're good. Just if you speak up just a little bit, I think that would be
okay.
Great.
Okay, so we're going to take Lenny, and let's say he moves in with Frank and his wife into an in-law suite, starts to live with them. Well, the beta amyloid plaque I was telling you about starts to form probably 15, 20 years before you start noticing a memory issue. So let's say that plaque's been building up, and all of a sudden things start disappearing. And one thing to listen for with people with Alzheimer's and dementia is whenever they start saying, I want to go home. It's something that I've talked to so many caregivers, and they say, you know, they keep saying they want to go home, they want to go home. Well, Lenny's telling the family he wants to go home, and Frank and his wife are trying to explain to him, this is where you live. Do you remember moving in with us? Well, that memory is completely gone. He's not going to remember that. So that memory's not there. You're not going to argue with somebody with Alzheimer's and win that argument. So there's really no point. You may need to redirect them. So what happens is this plaque keeps forming. These memories start to fade and disappear. If Lenny still has uniforms, his leather gear, his weapon from where he was a police officer, he may get up one day and put his uniform on, get his equipment, and get ready to walk out of the door to go to work. And the family, caregivers, Frank, his family, they're trying to explain to him, you don't work anymore. Well, in his mind, he works, and you need to leave, you know, let me go, or I'm going to get written up. I'll get a letter in my file. So these are problems that caregivers are constantly having to work through. And it's possible, and I've seen it happen before and heard many stories where a gentleman like Lenny rolls over and does not recognize the woman that's in the bed with him, has no idea who she is. And this is stranger in my bed, because at this point, when her memory's gone, you know, he rolls over and asks her who she is, and she says, I'm Betty, I'm your wife. Well, in his mind, his wife is Jane. And who are you, and what are you doing in my bed? And I've heard numerous instances of a wife rolling over and not recognizing the man in the bed with her, and actually taking a pair of scissors and starting to hack away. Then we end up getting called to come try to figure out what's going on, how this happened. So you can see how law enforcement could end up getting a lot of these calls. So this memory just keeps fading and fading, and as it progresses on, all these memories just go away. I can tell you we had a gentleman probably 2 or 3 weeks ago who got ready to wander off, and we got there before he left the yard. He's in his 50s, and when we got there, we asked him where he needed to go. He said he was trying to get to New York, and we're in Virginia, because he grew up as a child in New York. And we asked him how he was going to get there, and he said, well, I'm only 15. I can't drive, but I'm supposed to get my license next year, so I'm hoping to drive back to New York. So this 80-year-old man, in his mind, was 15 years old. So it's good to know where they are in their mind when we're interacting and dealing with them. But as this disease progresses, many times the immune system is jeopardized. And all of these things just start to disappear. And if you do not die of something else, you end up in hospice where your brain has forgotten how to tell your muscles how to move and do things. And then that first thing that your brain learned how to do, those first two things, first, your brain forgets how to swallow, and lastly, your brain forgets how to breathe. And that's the end of Lenny. And that is the terrible part about this disease. It is it's fatal, and a lot of people don't realize that. So you do have a lot of families who will use that word dementia all day long. They don't want to say the word Alzheimer's because they understand the ramifications and what they're dealing with. And do not argue with them about it. Let them believe whatever they want to believe. Many of them hang on to that dementia. You know, if somebody has Parkinson's and they've got dementia related to the Parkinson's, many times that's treatable. There are things that they can do to help deal with that. So that may be the only hope that that person or that family member has, is just hoping it's dementia, hoping we're going to find some resolution to this and be able to take care of the problem. And I'd also like to throw out there, while we're responding to calls dealing with these things, we also need to be aware that there are people that are working for us and with us who are these caregivers. They may not talk about it at work and let you know what's going on, but many of them are going through the struggle of dealing with a loved one who has Alzheimer's.
All right, so as Tim just mentioned, going through that illustration of the life and loss of somebody with Alzheimer's, it is a progressive brain disorder, and you could see how the person from the time he's born progresses through life like all of us do and our family members and loved ones do. But then once that person gets to the later stages of Alzheimer's, it starts regressing and they start, you know, slowly forgetting all these aspects of life, and it goes back to forgetting to breathe. And then, as Tim said, it is a fatal disease. So looking at this slide, the left side of the slide is showing what typically a normal brain looks like, the size of it. The right side is a brain with Alzheimer's where it's starting to deteriorate, and you can see the plaques and the holes that are forming in it as the brain is shrinking, and this lets you know that this is the person's memory and this is what's going on in their mind and why they're forgetting things, because it is, again, starts off as short-term memory loss. And this is what's happening to the brain. And the reason we show this on this webinar and also in the classes we teach is just so you get kind of a personal understanding of one of your loved ones or just somebody you're dealing with, of what's really going on in that person's mind, and they're not being deceitful. They're not trying to lie to you. It's just in their mind. This is what they know because of what is happening to them that they have no control over. So in the classes we do, we normally show a short video that kind of goes through and describes this, but Kim has done a really good job of illustrating what happens to the brain along with that picture. So we won't be showing that video, but it hopefully you're getting a kind of good visual in your mind as far as what's going on with somebody that has Alzheimer's. And to kind of recap the stigma of Alzheimer's, as Tim said, a lot of people are going to deny it. I mean, I know I've dealt with it personally as my aunt had Alzheimer's, and my parents and myself and my cousins, my aunt's own children, did not know that she had Alzheimer's for a while. She and my uncle were masking it, saying that she just wasn't feeling good, she was having a bad day or whatever as she was getting older, but they did not want to say that it was Alzheimer's. It's dementia, as Tim mentioned. And it happens to all of us, a little memory loss. And how many of you sometimes, you know, can't remember where you put your keys? Or my 17-year-old son last night went to go someplace and he couldn't find his wallet. Well, that doesn't mean that he's got dementia, Alzheimer's. It's just a little memory loss happens to everybody. So that's what a lot of times people with Alzheimer's and their caregivers will say. It's just, it's nothing, it's just a little memory loss. However, that turns into a progressive memory loss. And it is that cognitive deterioration of the brain that quite often we don't understand. And that's why out in the field, we will diagnose it, or we will look at it as being something totally different, only because we really don't know and haven't been trained in what to look for, what the signs and symptoms are of it.
Yeah, these two pictures I've got are actually pictures that I've had drawn, and one of the tests that doctors often give people when they're trying to diagnose Alzheimer's is this clock test. And, you know, it's nice if we're responding to a call and we have been given the information about, okay, you're responding to a residence or somebody there has Alzheimer's. That's great information to have, or somebody's on the scene to tell you. But many times we're pulling vehicles over or we're interacting with somebody and we don't know. This test right here, the one on the left, what you can do, you can pull a pad out and just hand it to the person. It was 9:35 at night, and gave the lady a piece of paper and a pen and told her it was 9:35, asked her if she would be able to draw me a clock, put the numbers in 1 through 12, and put the hands of the clock at 9:35. And that is what she drew. They can't seem to comprehend what to draw, and they will draw you pretty much anything but a clock. The one on the right, actually, I sat at the kitchen table with the lady. It was 7:25 at night. Asked her the same thing, if she would draw me the clock, put the numbers in 1 through 12, and put the hands at 7:25, I believe it is. And she was actually staring at a clock while she was drawing this, and that is what she drew me. So if you're questioning what's going on and something just doesn't seem right, it's not a bad idea just to throw that out there. Maybe ask them, do you know the day of the week? Do you know what year it is? Who's the president? Things like that, because you don't want to give that person their driver's license and send them on their way, because there's no telling where they will end up. But it's a very quick test you can do on the side of the road or pretty much anywhere to get a good idea of what's going on.
All right. In Alzheimer's, we normally refer to it, and doctors in the medical field does, is in 3 stages, referred to as the early stage, mid stage, and the late stage. And we're going to go through the next several slides talking about what we may see in cases that we respond to in each stage. And in the early stage, the neurons in the brain lose their ability to function and communicate with each other, and eventually they die, hence the starting deterioration of the brain. As we get to the middle stages, the moderate Alzheimer's and severe Alzheimer's, it just continues. And as Alzheimer's progresses, those tangles spread throughout the brain, that blue part that's on the right-hand side, and the plaque also spread throughout the brain, starting in the neurocortex. By the final stage, damage is widespread and brain tissue has shrunk significantly. So as we respond to things out in the field, symptoms of the early stage is going to be things that can happen to any of us on any day and time. You know, forgetfulness, some speech issues, poor judgment. You know, we all know in law enforcement, we deal with people that you know, use poor judgment all the time, losing things, as I mentioned before, and then taking longer to complete daily activities. And for that, I mean, for some of us, as we get older, it takes us longer to complete normal daily activities than it did maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago. It doesn't necessarily mean that person is in the early stages of Alzheimer's, but it's an indicator of something to look for. Maybe do I need to ask some more questions of this person to see just what we have. In the early stages, what might we see in law enforcement out in the field on calls? Could be speech problems. We quite often, you know, we run across people that have speech problems. It could be some driving problems. The speech problems could be from possibly drinking. The driving problems could be from drinking, but those two may not be. It may be from the early stages of Alzheimer's. Difficult locating documents that you request, license, proof of insurance, those type of things that should be readily available in the car. Quite often when somebody is having difficulty locating them, the officer on the street is going to think this person's being deceitful or hiding something from me, doesn't want to show me, or doesn't have insurance, or doesn't have a license. They might hand you a credit card instead of their license. To them, they're handing you their license because that's what you've asked for. And when they're looking through their documents, they see that, and in their mind, that is their driver's license. So we need to be aware of these things. And then we could get calls of shoplifting where the storekeeper says that this person shoplifted an item, but in that person's mind, that item truly belongs to them because they have something that looks very similar to it. or they really have no recollection that they walked into the store and picked something up off the counter. They thought it was their dresser in their bedroom, and they picked up their watch or whatever the item may be, and truly in their mind think that that item is theirs. Some symptoms of the middle stage, increased memory loss and some confusion. Now they start having some problems recognizing people. So they may not recognize family members. They may not even be able to recognize, you as the officer standing in uniform. They may not realize who you are. Inability to learn new things. For the majority of us in society, every day we're learning new things. Somebody in the middle stages of Alzheimer's is going to have trouble doing that. Their motor skills are going to start getting, worse and worse every day, where their motor skills are going to be poor and unbalanced walking. And again, we might misdiagnose this all the time as somebody that is, has a mental disability, has been drinking, is maybe on some type of illegal drugs if their balance is unsteady. But in fact, it could be that, they're not drinking, not in any type of drugs, not trying to be deceitful or whatever. It's just due to what's happening in their brain, and they're in the middle stage of Alzheimer's, and their walking is going to be diminished. And what we might see, again, speech problems, truly some people disoriented, having issues with basic needs that most of us on a daily basis, don't have any trouble doing, brushing our teeth, fixing our breakfast, getting dressed, that type of thing. They're going to have some issues with it. And if you stop and think about just brushing your teeth, how many steps are there in brushing your teeth? Most of us take it for granted. We just walk into the bathroom in the morning and brush our teeth. But it's, where is the bathroom, walking in the bathroom, turning on the light, picking up, the toothbrush. Is it the toothbrush, or are they picking up a hairbrush? Toothpaste, are they picking up toothpaste, or is it some type of hair gel or something else that might be in the bathroom, and taking the cap off of it, turning the water on, those type of things. As they get in the middle stages, they start having some difficulty doing that, and you may see some of that out in the field. Driving is going to be getting worse. Middle stages is when they start wandering off, and we'll talk about wandering a little bit more in just a few minutes. And now they really start being uncooperative, and this can be an issue for law enforcement if they're out interviewing people or questioning somebody on an incident out in the field where the person with Alzheimer's is going to be uncooperative. We all know what happens when officers sense that somebody's being uncooperative with them. It normally doesn't go very well from there for that person. But if we understand and recognize these things and just take our time, take another couple minutes to ask a few more questions, look at a couple other things, we may be able to save some heartache and some headache for everybody. Late stages, it's really starting to get bad now. Inability to recognize themselves or family members, quite often inability to communicate. They're now starting to have suffer some weight loss. Might start getting some other medical issues, some skin infections, difficulty swallowing. You'll see some moaning, groaning, or grunting. Again, let's not misdiagnose this as something else. None of us are doctors, so let's not try and do some type of, quick medical exam on the side of the road and know that this person has, a mental disability, or this person has something else. It very well could be one of the stages of Alzheimer's. They're going to start sleeping a lot more, and then they'll have lack of bodily functions. As far as what we're going to see in law enforcement on the late stages, we'll see some of this, but not quite as much, because in the late stages, we typically won't have as many calls for service as we've had on the early or the mid stages. You may get calls from neighbors or somebody else about signs of elder abuse and neglect, when in fact the caregiver's doing the best they can, just because of what's going on in the Alzheimer's patient's body. It's starting to shut down and so forth. It may appear that they're abused or neglect. More calls for assistance, and then again, the wandering is going to be even more so than in the mid stages. And then there could be calls of homicide or suicide, where the person knows they have Alzheimer's and they don't want to go through the feeling that they're going through anymore. They don't want their loved ones to have to put up with them, so they may decide to take their own life. Or there have been cases, unfortunately, where the caregiver has committed a homicide. They have killed the person with Alzheimer's, either because they can't take it anymore, or a mercy killing, trying to get them out of their misery so they don't suffer anymore. And then they realize what they did, and they can't live with themselves, so then they take their own life. So these are some things to be aware of when you have something that, maybe doesn't add up as your typical call. Start, going back and looking at some of these things and kind of see what we may have. And if you look at this slide, it talks about what goes through the mind of someone with Alzheimer's. This could be you. They're confused, they're disoriented, they're lost, they're tired, they're baffled. Think about when we have it's the summer, it's hot right now. I'm in the Dallas area and it's over 100 degrees. So, you get tired easy. You can get disoriented from the heat. We know that we're getting disoriented or tired. We can come inside, we can get some air conditioning, we can take a break, but this is going on in the mind of someone with Alzheimer's, and they don't realize, they don't know what to do. And this is 24/7 in their mind. They realize that something's not quite right, but they can't put their finger on it, and they can't really tell you, hey, something's going on, I'm confused, but I don't know why. It's just kind of what's going on in their brain. So again, something to keep in mind and try and understand when you're dealing with somebody that is showing some of these signs and symptoms.
There's some medications to be looking for when you're dealing with, any call for service. I know law enforcement, many times we're paid to be nosy and be observant and see what's going on, but there may be situations where you respond with the rescue squad or EMS to help deal with a patient who ends up being transported. And I would keep my eyes out for any of these medications. These are the generic names for some of the medications that you may see. There is also the regular names, the Aricept, Namenda, Razodine, Cognex, things like that. But I would keep an eye out for pill bottles and things. And if you've got something sitting there with one of these names on it, and that person who's being transported, it's not their medication, hopefully you're going to realize there should be somebody else affiliated with that residence or possibly in that residence that is dealing with dementia, dealing with Alzheimer's, and you need to find them because they need to be cared for. That may be the sole caregiver that's on the way to the hospital. They may be unconscious, not be able to tell you anything. And somebody with Alzheimer's may hear confusion and go and try to seclude themselves because they don't know what's going on. But we don't want to get a call 2 weeks later about the mail piling up or there's just a terrible smell coming from that house where we've left somebody in that house and we didn't realize they were there. So just keep your eyes open for any of these medications that you might run across. The wandering issue is a big issue that we're dealing with in public safety these days. And some stats we have, it's approximately 60% of people with Alzheimer's dementia will wander off at some point. They will try to go home, or they're looking for something familiar to them, a place they remember, or wherever they think they live at the time, they'll try to get there. And of that 60%, about 70% will constantly do it over and over. So we need to be ready for it. I know you think about how many manpower hours are spent out searching for people, and many of them will wander off on foot. While there are some that will just get in the car and drive, we have a serious issue with individuals walking off on foot. When you approach them, they may not remember their name. They may not know, the address that they currently live at. They may tell you they live somewhere else, and only for you to find out that they lived there 20, 30 years ago. But they're trying to get somewhere familiar. And the term wandering is misleading because they're not just out there walking around aimlessly. They usually develop a mission in their mind. They know where they're going. They want to get there, and they will do anything in their power to get there. So if you ran across somebody walking up the side of the highway and you walked up to ask them if they needed help, in their mind they don't. So they're not going to say, hey, I'm lost. They can probably tell you exactly where they're headed, but when they get there, it may not look anything like they remember. So then they will tend to keep walking. So again, you're not necessarily looking for somebody who's lost and wants to be found. They know where they're going, and they're doing everything in their power to get there. They will have that mission. They're looking for something, or they're trying to escape something. There have been situations where they've relived the past. They can hallucinate, relive events that have happened. I'll tell you one example I use that kind of brings the point home. There's a gentleman we had here in our county who fought in World War II. He was in the Navy. And once a month, he'd put his Navy uniform on and go down, walking down the road. And middle of the night, if you stopped to ask where he was headed, he would tell you, I'm headed to Norfolk, Virginia. I've got to go overseas. Well, in his mind, it was the 1940s. And in the United States, we were at war with Germany and Russia. Well, I had two officers who worked for me. One was of Asian descent. One actually had a very strong, thick Russian accent. I did not want them pulling up to check on this man or talking to this man, because if he's in that mindset and they pull up and they're in uniform, there's a good possibility he's going to see them as the enemy, and next thing you know, he's on top of them trying to take their life, and they may have to use force. Unfortunately, they may have to use deadly force. So I would typically, when I heard the call come out, I would tell those two officers not to respond, and I would usually have one of my officers who had been in the Navy go down there, walk up to him, start carrying on a conversation, saying, "Even where are you headed?" "Well, sir, I'm headed to Norfolk." "Well, I need you to come here." And they had that common lingo, that Navy language that they were able to connect. And he would take the gentleman to one of the restaurants around here and sit there and wait for the caregiver to show up. So that's how it's practical as far as law enforcement, why we need to understand what's going on, because we don't know always where they are in their mind. So they can relive the past, and they may not recognize signals to stop if they're wandering off. If they do wander off, many times they've got other medical issues and they're not taking their medications with them. They don't recognize the signs of dehydration, the hunger. So all of those things go without being addressed. Like I said before, they're unlikely to shout out for help. Everybody out there looking for them knows they're lost. They are the only ones that don't know they're lost. And they will seldom take a logical path. They will walk into any terrain. You may see briars, brush, and think in your mind there's no way anybody in their right mind would go into that area. Well, knowing now what you know about Alzheimer's, the question is, are they in their right mind? Because many times they have been found in those areas stuck, still thinking they're walking, their feet are moving, and they're being cut up and torn up by briars, and not really feeling a lot of pain. I told you about the immune system, and sometimes they don't feel things as they normally would. So they could be in there walking thinking they're going somewhere. They may walk until they hit a barrier, their creek or something. They may turn and just start following that creek. But they've also, for some reason, large bodies of water, many of them will walk straight into it and just keep on walking. So you end up with the drownings. They will try to hide and seclude themselves. You've got to think, going through their mind, everything that everybody's telling them is wrong. There's got to be this frightened feeling when nothing seems to add up, nothing seems to be as it should, and you're always told that things are not what you think. So many times they get irritated, agitated, scared, and they will seclude themselves. And again, the water, like I was saying, we need to definitely check those water areas before we clear up. This study is in Virginia. There's been some research and tracking of search and rescue missions here in the state. And what they found, I think it's probably a 20-year period, 94% of all wandering cases, they were found within 1.5 miles of the point last seen, and nearly 70% were found in the residence. When we get the calls, the officers respond. Many times the family tells you, "Oh, we checked the house, we checked the house." Well, we still need to get in there and check that residence, because that family member is stressed. They're frustrated, they're upset, they're scared. They may overlook something. So we need to get in there and we need to check those areas ourselves before we start focusing on the outside. If they're not in the residence, we're not in the residence, they were usually found a short distance from a road. If not found on the road, 63% were found in a creek or drainage ditch and caught in briars and brush. 80% of those found after 72 hours ended up dying of hypothermia, drowning, or dehydration. So it's imperative for us to get there quickly and start those searches. And it's tough sometimes to explain to the caregivers that we need that 911 call because it is an emergency, so we can get on the way.
So some of the things we may face is some driving issues. I mean, obviously, if they're not sure where they're going, they can get lost. They can end up a few counties away or states away. We've seen that several times. For the caregiver, it's a very, very difficult decision or conversation to have to convince somebody to stop driving. They've been driving since they were 15, 16 years old, and this could be really the only sense of freedom left that they have to do themselves. So you got to be, you got to work with your caregivers. If you see somebody in your community where it might be time, some things that, that may help, we'll go over, but some common dangers include difficulty staying alert, missing traffic signals or road signs, becoming disoriented or distracted, running out of gas. They're driving, they don't realize they need gas. They'll just keep driving until they run out of gas. And also, since they miss traffic signals or road signs, they could turn on an interstate and go the wrong way. We've seen that happen too many times. That could be very dangerous for everyone, including the police that have to try and go down the interstate the wrong way to stop this person. Some things that we can deal with the insistent unsafe driver is discuss with the caregivers, review some of these common dangers, suggest some type of DMV medical review form. I believe most DMVs in each state have some type of review form. And then a couple other things we recommend, and this was going to sound kind of funny, but recommend getting a no driving prescription. If the caregiver can talk to the patient's doctor and let them know what's going on, the doctor should know what's going on, but the doctor can just write a prescription saying, because you're not feeling well or whatever the case might be, no driving for 6 months. And, go home, put that on the refrigerator. Most people, as they get older, and this is, again, not necessarily just an older person's disease, but most of the people that we're going to be dealing with have gotten to the senior citizen stage. They might be in, their 60s, 70s or whatever. They listen to their doctor. So if they're thinking of going someplace and you're the caregiver or talk to the caregiver, you can say, look, Mom, remember, the doctor said no driving for 6 months. Here's the prescription. And then, oh, okay, I forgot about that. Well, 2 weeks later, it's still going to be 6 months because they don't recognize the date. There is some no driving contracts that are available through the National Alzheimer's Association, which might be something good to get somebody to sign in the early stages, that you have a conversation with the loved one as the caregiver and say, look, when we realize it's time for you to stop driving, you agree that you'll listen to us. That's something that may work in the early and mid stages, but if it's the later mid stage or the late mid stage or the late stage, they're not going to remember signing that. And then another thing that's could be very good is suggest disabling or selling the vehicle. If you disable it, make sure that you recommend to the caregiver that they really disable it, not just loosen a battery cable or something, because it's been known that, the person with Alzheimer's goes to get in their car, it doesn't start. They're still pretty sound, sound mind at certain parts of the day, and they'll call AAA to come and get the car started. And they'll say, oh, it was just a loose battery cable, and they'll get the person on their way, not knowing that a caregiver had disabled the car for specific reasons. So just be aware of that. Selling the car, if you can, is, might be, a recommended way to go. When we're interviewing caregivers, some things to ask the family members: have they gone missing before? Have they wandered off? How long ago? Where might they have gone? Where did you find them? Any time period that they may be in. As Tim mentioned earlier, if they're reverting back to 20, 30 years ago, they may think they're living in another city, another country, whatever the case may be. So try and find out what period they may be thinking in their mind. Tim also mentioned check the house yourself. You'd be surprised at where somebody with Alzheimer's can crawl into a space that the average person doesn't realize that a person could fit into a cabinet or a small crawl space. Treat it like a crime scene if needed. As I mentioned earlier with the homicide, suicide, you could have a caregiver that has committed a homicide and they're reporting the person wandered off. And that person may be in the bedroom under the bed or covered up in sheets on the bed, and they've been suffocated or shot or whatever. So treat it like a crime scene, explain to the caregiver why, and then get a recent picture of the patient so you can put that out to everybody assisting in the search and rescue, so they can, have something to recognize them as soon as possible when they, if they happen to see that person out in the community.
And we covered a lot of what law enforcement may encounter out on the road. And one thing, back to what Hank was saying, the picture, make sure that picture is a recent picture, because Alzheimer's will change your appearance drastically. So you need to try to get that caregiver to get you something that is very, very much updated, so you know exactly who you're looking for. But as far as law enforcement encounters, we've covered a lot of those. The domestic violence, with the big push for the making arrests and develop domestic violence, I know many states have gone to mandatory arrests. It says you shall in the case of domestic assault. If you've got a predominant aggressor, you've got signs of assault. You take somebody like that who we had, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, had a situation where a husband was in the house, and he thought a stranger was in the house and ended up stabbing this female in the house. Well, officers got there. She was lying in the front yard with cuts and was in pretty bad shape. And the husband actually came to the front door and yelled at the officers, asking them if they had seen his wife, because he'd been looking around the house and couldn't find her. She had gotten a haircut, and he did not recognize her. He thought she was a stranger. However, he did not even remember stabbing anybody. So, the question is, does your state code have a way to deal with these situations? Because obviously the gentleman, if you took him into custody, took him to jail, took him to a correction facility, would that necessarily be the safest or best course of action? Here in Virginia, there is a code section that's tacked on in there in reference to domestic assault that says that we shall make the arrest unless there are extenuating circumstances that will call for another course of action. You may have to get mental health involved. You may have to get them to the hospital to do something else. I would check your code section, your state codes, to see if there's anything in there, because you take somebody dealing with Alzheimer's, and it's possible that if you put them in a correction facility, into a jail with the general population, they could become a victim in there. And then you're trying to find out what happened the next day, and you can't get them to remember what happened. You don't even understand what happened to them because they don't remember the situation. So, like we said, the suicide, homicide, you call for abuse, shoplifters, neglect, other emergencies, the wandering, and the theft and home invasion. And if you think about it, what better victim than somebody who can't remember? The elderly are already being victimized and scammed, but now you've got elderly possibly who have Alzheimer's dementia who cannot remember things. And that's why it's imperative for us to get this information out.
As Tim said, what better victim to be exploited or to have a criminal act, done upon them than someone with Alzheimer's, for all the reasons that we've talked about. They're very easy targets. They can't remember. So, be aware, and everybody probably knows this, but, the phone scams that are out there, they befriend people. Could be something going on in a nursing home or assisted living. Check pawn lists. They could have some of their property, was taken by, could be a family member, a neighbor, or whatever, or somebody that befriended them doing their lawn or doing some work around the house. And also, unfortunately, there's been cases where public safety has been known to exploit somebody with Alzheimer's because they won't remember and won't recognize them. Some of what to look for, we talked about the medications, but those could be stolen or taken. Jewelry, money, they could be abused or neglected. They could have them sign documents, signing over power of attorney, those type of things. So, there's several things that we need to be aware of for exploitation of victims and people with Alzheimer's. When you're dealing with them, you want to make sure you communicate effectively. Quickly we're going to go over what we should do when dealing with somebody, and what to never do with dealing with somebody. There's risk management involved. Consider what they may be feeling or thinking, and again, remember, they're not criminals, but they are somebody's loved ones.
And these are interactions that you have. It's just a list. I would take these with you. I think the PowerPoint's going to be available to you all. But we pretty much covered a lot of this. You just treat them with respect. They're scared. They're not sure what's going on. They've got confusion in their brain. So use that eye contact. Don't treat them like they're deaf. Just talk in a soft voice. They're not dumb. They're not stupid. They are smart, intelligent, but they're losing those memories. And just show them the respect that you would like to be shown, and you're going to have a whole lot easier interaction. And the second is what not to do. Don't argue. I told you that. You're not going to win. Don't get angry or frustrated. Don't be sarcastic. And again, don't try to correct them, because as far as they're concerned, they're right, and you're not going to change that. One thing is, before you touch them, ask them if you can touch them, because they're, again, on edge many times. And if all of a sudden the hand is put on their shoulder, they may react. Not that they're trying to assault you, but they're scared, not sure what's going on, and they're trying to protect themselves. So just keep those in mind for your safety. Now, the safety does come first. I don't want any officer hurt. My number one goal at the end of the day is going home at the end of the night. My second goal is everybody else going home safely at the end of the night. Be prepared. Just remember about the PTSD, the TBI. You don't know where they are in their mind when you're interacting with them. They may be back at war, and we need to be ready for anything and everything, and use your caution. Just try to figure out where they are in their mind, what year, what situation, so you can better address the problem.
All right. If you're out in the community and you have this person on the side of the road, you're going to put them in your unit. Just think about safety things first. Cage units might be an issue for them. The confinement, radios blaring, weapons that might be available to them, the flashing lights. Look at to cuff or not to cuff, depending on your department policies. We don't want you to violate policies, but look at all these things and other concerns if you're going to put them in your unit. One of the big things is community collaboration. I mean, here's on this slide, just different people in your communities you should be aware of that could be a resource for you when you have somebody with Alzheimer's that you may find wandering around, or the caregivers may not know what's available to them in your community. So if you know about social services or hospitals or critical care units, those type of things, it could be very helpful. And we recommend making a list of this to have available so you readily have it, so you can pass it on to caregivers if need be. And every community is going to be a little bit different. Policies, if you don't have a policy in your agency about responding to calls with specific with people with Alzheimer's, you should. It's going to be a little different than your normal search and rescue or lost person policy. And also keep in mind about the caregivers that you want to make sure you have something in your policies about caregivers and how to deal with them. Some other steps and resources to consider. After today, go back and take some of this information, do roll call trainings. Maybe your crime prevention units can pass some information on to your citizens, educate the citizens. Every state, every community has an Alzheimer's Association chapter. You can invite them to meetings to get some information more about dealing with the caregiver and the people that have Alzheimer's, your citizens. Encourage family members to keep in touch. And then get mutual aid down. Most agencies have it, but work on it specifically for search and rescue of somebody with Alzheimer's. And there's other programs out there. There's a program called Take Me Home that's popular in a lot of areas. You might want to look at that. You can find that online, where people in the community work with you all, and the person with Alzheimer's wears something on them that identifies them as a patient with Alzheimer's through the Take Me Home program. So there's several different things to consider on how to make this better and respond more effectively to calls for service with somebody with Alzheimer's and their caregivers. And that's what Tim and I have. I know a lot of information in a short period of time, but hopefully you all were able to get some good information in this webinar that you'll be able to use and go back to your communities and your organizations and start working more effectively to help when you get these types of calls.
Yes, thank you all very much for listening.
All right,
Great.
thank you, Tim. Oh, go ahead, Nina.
No, I just wanted to go over some of the questions that Oh, I'm sorry. I realized we are out of time. Yeah, I think that's it. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to the Elder Justice website, elder.justice@usdoj.gov, and to access this webinar, which is recording will be posted online, and past webinars, please visit www.elderjustice.gov.